Red Roses, Dark Secrets. Valentine's Day had always been a special occasion in the small town of Ravenshead. Every year, couples would fill the streets, exchanging flowers, chocolates, and whispered affections. But beneath the town's romantic facade lay a legend, one whispered by the elders. The curse of the black-hearted bride. It all began in 1892, when Eleanor Blackwood, a young bride-to-be, was left waiting at the altar. Her fiancé, Thomas Holloway, had vanished without a trace the night before their wedding. Heartbroken and humiliated, Eleanor wandered the streets of Ravenshead for days, her once pristine gown dragging through the mud as she clutched her bridal bouquet, whispering Thomas's name. On the 5th night, she was found hanging from the grand oak tree in the town square. Her face was contorted in anguish, her hands locked around a single red rose, its petals dripping with her own blood. Some say she took her life out of despair, but others claim they saw something unnatural that night, her lifeless body swaying as if she had been pulled up by unseen hands. Since then, every Valentine's Day, an inexplicable tragedy would befall an unlucky couple. The rose would appear first, its petals unnaturally dark, as if soaked in shadows. Then, whispers would follow, soft, pleading voices that lured lovers into the night, and before dawn, another soul would be claimed beneath the cursed oak, their hearts forever bound to Eleanor's sorrow. This year, Melissa and Ryan had planned a perfect Valentine's Day evening. They had been dating for 2 years and Ryan was ready to propose. He had arranged a romantic dinner at Ravenshead's oldest restaurant, the Holloway Inn, named ironically after the infamous missing groom. Melissa arrived first, shivering against the cold night air. The restaurant was dimly lit, its antique chandeliers casting eerie shadows on the red velvet walls. A single candle flickered on her table, next to a delicate glass of red wine. She took a sip, relishing the taste, but something felt off. The air was thick with a scent of roses, but beneath it lingered an unpleasant metallic tang. Minutes passed, then an hour. Ryan was never late. Her phone buzzed, a message from Ryan. "Meet me outside by the oak tree, I have a surprise." Her heart skipped a beat. She grabbed her coat and hurried out, her breath fogging in the night air. The town square was deserted, save for the ancient oak tree looming in the center. Moonlight bathed its twisted branches, casting claw-like shadows on the cobblestone ground. "Ryan?" she called, her voice trembling. No response. A single red rose lay at the base of the tree. Next to it, something glistened. A ring. Her hands shook as she picked it up. It was Ryan's engagement ring, the one he had shown her best friend just days ago. Confused, she turned around, scanning the darkness. A soft whisper. "Melissa." She spun back toward the tree, her breath hitching. A figure stood there. A woman in a tattered wedding dress, her face obscured by a black veil. "Kenunsa?" "Shiwakasimodama." Melissa staggered back. "Who are you?" The woman lifted her veil, revealing hollow sockets where her eyes should have been. Blood dripped from her lips as she grinned, revealing jagged yellow teeth. Melissa screamed and stumbled away, her foot catching on something. She fell hard, her hand scraping against the cobblestone. Daring to look down, her stomach twisted in horror. Ryan's lifeless body lay beneath her, his throat slashed, his eyes wide in a frozen expression of terror. His blood pooled around the rose he had left for her. A cold hand touched her shoulder. The last thing she heard before darkness consumed her was the ghostly whisper of Eleanor Blackwood. "Till death do us part." The next morning, the townspeople found Melissa hanging from the oak tree, a single red rose in her hands. The legend continued. More couples fell victim to the curse, their bodies discovered beneath the oak tree. No one knew how to stop it. Some tried to flee the town before Valentine's Day, but they never made it past the town's border. Others avoided relationships altogether, fearing that love itself had become a death sentence. Then, one day, a strange occurrence shook the town. A local historian, Gregory Wallace, who had spent years researching Eleanor's tragic past, made a shocking discovery in an old, dust-covered journal, hidden beneath the floorboards of the abandoned Blackwood estate. The journal belonged to none other than Thomas Holloway, Eleanor's vanished fiancé. Its brittle pages contained frantic entries, confessions of a betrayal, a secret love affair, and his desperate attempt to escape Ravenshed before the wedding, but the most chilling entry was the last. She found me. I never made it out. If you are reading this, know that Eleanor is not seeking revenge. She is searching for something. Something she lost the night she died. If you find it before she does, you may break the curse. But beware. She watches. She waits. And she never forgets. Gregory knew he had to act fast. But as he read the final words, a gust of wind howled through the room, blowing the candle out. In the darkness, a single red rose lay on the journal's open pages, its petals blackened at the edges. The air grew cold. A whisper echoed behind him, "Till death do us part." One winter, a journalist named Daniel Carter arrived in Ravenshaven, determined to uncover the truth. He was skeptical, dismissing the tales as local superstition. Armed with a camera and a notepad, he set out to prove the legend false. Eager to prove the legend false, midnight came, and the town lay silent. The wind howled through the branches of the ancient oak, its gnarled limbs stretching like skeletal fingers against the night sky. Daniel set up his camera, checking the lens and adjusting the focus. His breath fogged in the frigid air as he whispered to himself, documenting his thoughts. No sign of anything unusual, just a tree and a lot of old stories. Then, something shifted. A strange, heavy stillness blanketed the square, pressing against his chest like an unseen force. The temperature plummeted. The candle he had placed beside him flickered violently before snuffing out. Daniel's pulse quickened. He lifted his camera, peering through the viewfinder. At first, nothing but darkness. Then, a shape materialized. A woman in a tattered wedding dress stood beneath the oak, her black veil flowing in naturally, as if moved by an unseen current. In her outstretched hand, she clutched a single red rose. But Daniel's attention was drawn to something even more disturbing. Her feet hovered inches above the ground. A chill ran down his spine as he lowered the camera. The woman was gone. Only the rose remained, lying at the base of the tree. A whisper curled through the air, "Till death do us part." Daniel spun around, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The square was empty, but when he looked back at his camera screen, his heart stopped. The last photo taken was of Eleanor Blackwood, her eyeless face grinning at him, but she was not alone. Behind her stood dozens of shadowy figures. Their faces were pale, their mouths open in silent screams. Melissa, Ryan, Claire, Jason. The names of the lost. And there, at the very end of the line, staring directly at the lens, was Daniel himself. The camera slipped from his trembling fingers, shattering against the cobblestone. He turned to run, but something cold clamped around his wrist. His breath caught as icy fingers curled around his throat, pulling him backward. The last sound he heard was the rustling of fabric, the whisper of a veil brushing against his skin, and the final, damning words, spoken, in a voice that did not belong to the living. "Now you're mine." Midnight came. The wind whispered, the branches creaked, and the air grew deathly cold. As Daniel peered through his camera lens, his breath hitched. A woman in a tattered wedding dress stood before him, her black veil billowing in the wind. A single red rose fell at his feet. His camera flashed once, before the darkness swallowed him whole. The next morning, all that remained of Daniel was his camera, lying beside the oak tree, its last captured image, a grinning, eyeless bride. But this time there was something different. Behind Eleanor stood a row of shadowy figures, their faces eerily familiar. Melissa, Ryan, Claire, Jason, and dozens of others, their expressions frozen in agony. The townspeople gasped in horror. They recognized every face. These were not just victims of the curse. These were the souls that had been taken, trapped in an endless cycle of terror. But there was one more detail that sent a chill through everyone who saw the photo. The last figure in the image was Daniel himself. As the town debated what to do, a new couple arrived in Ravenshed. Young, in love, and completely unaware of what awaited them. That evening, they checked into the Holloway Inn, laughing over dinner as they toasted their new life together. At exactly midnight, a note slid beneath their door. "Meet me by the oak tree. I have a surprise." Outside, the wind whispered, carrying a chilling message through the night. "Till death do us part." and the legend of Eleanor Blackwood lived on. The new couple, Natalie and Ben, couldn't shake off the unease that settled in their chests as they read the note. End of song. They had heard the stories, of course. Everyone in Ravenshead knew the legend of the cursed oak and the black-hearted bride, but they dismissed it as superstition, a tale told to keep the town's children in line, to scare them from venturing too close to the ancient tree. But now, as midnight struck and they stood on the edge of the square, a growing dread seeped into their bones. "Maybe we should go back inside," Natalie said, her voice trembling slightly, despite her best efforts to appear brave. Ben, ever the skeptic, chuckled and took her hand. "Come on, don't tell me you believe in that nonsense. We're just here to enjoy a quiet night. It's just some old ghost story." Still, as they approached the oak tree, the air grew unnaturally cold. The town square, usually alive with chatter and movement, felt unnervingly still. The cobblestones beneath their feet seemed to pulse with an energy they couldn't quite explain. And then, they saw it. A single red rose lay at the base of the oak tree, its petals dark and shadowed, glistening as though soaked in dew. A chilling breeze stirred the branches above, and Natalie's stomach twisted in knots. Ben squatted to pick up the rose. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, though his voice wavered. But before he could stand up, a sound echoed from the shadows, a soft, mournful whisper. "Till death do us part." They froze. A chill so deep it felt like ice crawled up their spines. A figure materialized before them, standing beneath the oak tree. The same figure that had haunted the town for over a century. The bride, dressed in her tattered, blood-stained gown, her black veil flowing in the wind, obscuring her face. Natalie's breath caught in her throat. She tried to speak, but her voice failed her. The bride's head slowly tilted, and then she raised her veil. The hollow sockets where her eyes should have been glared back at them with a terrible hunger. Her lips parted in a grin that seemed to stretch too wide, her jagged teeth glistening in the moonlight. "Run!" Ben shouted, pulling Natalie's hand, but the air grew thick, suffocating. He stumbled back, his legs unsteady. "Ben!" Natalie cried, her voice breaking. The figure's feet lifted off the ground, just like the legends had said. She was hovering, gliding toward them with unnatural grace. Suddenly the wind whipped violently, and a blinding flash of light engulfed the square. When it cleared, the figure was gone. But the rose remained, lying on the ground between them, its blackened petals glistening with an unnatural shine. Ben collapsed to his knees, staring at the rose, his face pale. His breathing was shallow, his hands trembling. "Natalie? What? What just happened?" His voice cracked, a mixture of fear and disbelief. She didn't answer. Instead, she turned and ran, her footsteps echoing through the square. Ben, still in a daze, struggled to follow. But his legs felt like lead, each step heavier than the last. They reached the Holloway Inn, breathless and terrified. Natalie slammed the door behind them, locking it. Ben sank onto the couch, staring at his hands, still trembling. His eyes flicked toward the window, his mind reeling. He had seen it, felt it. The curse was real. "Maybe we're not supposed to be here," Natalie whispered, her voice shaky. "Maybe we need to leave Ravenshead?" But Ben, still skeptical despite the terror that gripped him, shook his head. "We're fine, it's just a story." But even as he said the words, a soft tap echoed from the window. A single red rose pressed against the glass. The door rattled, and from the darkness outside they heard it. Soft, almost too soft to hear, but unmistakable. "Till death do us part." A cold dread washed over them both. They knew they weren't alone anymore. In the dead of night, when the town of Ravenshead lay shrouded in silence, the curse would claim its next victims, and Eleanor Blackwood would continue her eternal search for something lost, her whisper haunting the streets until the end of time. And as the next morning dawned, the rose remained. It always would. The morning light in Ravenshead was dull, casting a weak grey glow over the town. But there was something different about this morning. Something ominous in the air. The town was still, as though it were holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Natalie and Ben had spent the night in a haze of fear, clutching each other as the hours passed, waiting for something to break the silence. But nothing came, no more whispers, no more visions of the bride. Yet, neither of them could shake the cold grip of terror that still clung to their bones. The rose pressed against the window was gone, but the chilling presence remained. They had barely spoken all morning, too scared to confront the reality of what they had experienced. Finally, they decided to leave the inn and explore the town. Maybe seeing the daylight would help clear their minds. As they stepped outside, the air was heavy with an unsettling quiet. The cobblestone streets were empty, no one in sight. Ravenshade, once a town of lively chatter and bustling life, felt abandoned, as if the curse had seeped into every corner, claiming more than just the souls of its victims. It had claimed the very heart of the town. They walked toward the town square, each step echoing louder than it should. The oak tree loomed ahead, its branches twisted and dark, stretching out like fingers reaching for the sky. It stood there, as it always had, a silent sentinel to the many lives lost beneath it. Ben stopped a few paces away, his eyes drawn to something at the base of the tree. "No," he whispered, his voice hoarse. Natalie followed his gaze. Another rose. This one was even darker than before, its petals blackened at the edges, its stem thick with thorns. And beneath it a figure lay sprawled on the ground. Ben's breath caught in his throat. No, it can't be. They rushed forward, their hearts pounding. The figure was lifeless, but there was no mistaking it. It was Gregory Wallace, the historian who had been researching Eleanor's past. His body was twisted at an unnatural angle, his eyes wide open, staring at the sky, a look of pure terror frozen on his face. In his hand was a single red rose. Natalie staggered back, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh my God, we're too late." Ben knelt beside Gregory, his eyes scanning the scene. "The curse. It's still alive. It never stopped. She's still looking for something." And that's when they noticed it. The journal, open on the ground beside Gregory's lifeless body. A single page was torn out, fluttering in the breeze. Ben grabbed it, his hands trembling as he read aloud. "It's the ring," he muttered, his voice strained. "It's the only thing that can stop her." Natalie's heart raced as she listened to Ben's words. "The ring? What ring?" Ben's face paled as he continued reading. "Thomas Holloway's ring. Eleanor was searching for it the night she died. If someone finds it before she does, the curse will end." A flash of realization hit Natalie. "But where is it? The ring? Where could it be?" Ben stood up, his mind racing. "It must be here somewhere. We need to find it." They began searching frantically, scouring the area around the oak tree. The ground beneath their feet felt like it was pulsing with an unseen energy, and the air around them seemed to hum with an ominous tension. The whispers returned, faint and haunting, floating on the wind till death do us part. Natalie froze, her heart hammering in her chest. Ben too felt it, the coldness that gripped them both. "She's here," Natalie whispered, her voice trembling. Suddenly, the ground beneath them cracked open with a sharp, deafening sound. They stumbled back, gasping in terror as a dark, ghostly figure emerged from the earth. The figure was Eleanor Blackwood, her tattered wedding dress billowing around her like a shroud, her eyeless face twisted into a grotesque grin, and in her hand she held the ring, Thomas Holloway's ring, glinting in the dim light. "You think you can stop me?" Eleanor's voice echoed, a deep, hollow sound that made the air around them vibrate. "You cannot undo what has been done." Ben stepped forward, his eyes fixed on the ring. "We have to try. We have to end this." But Eleanor's laugh echoed in the air, cruel and hollow. "You think you can take what is mine?" She raised her hand and the ground trembled beneath their feet. A deep, inhuman voice filled their ears, the whispers growing louder, more frantic. "Till death do us part." Suddenly, the rose that had been lying on the ground shot into the air, spinning around them like a twisted storm. The petals, dark and dripping with something that wasn't dew, flew in every direction, cutting at their skin as they tried to shield themselves. "You cannot break the bond," Eleanor hissed, her voice rising in fury. "We are one, always." Natalie's heart raced as she looked at Ben, their faces pale and twisted in terror. The air around them grew thick with shadows, suffocating them both. But then, something unexpected happened. The ring in Eleanor's hand began to glow, faintly at first, but then brighter, pulsing with an unnatural light. The wind began to howl, and the shadows that surrounded them seemed to retreat. Ben reached out, trembling, and grabbed the ring from Eleanor's grasp. For a moment, everything went still. The air cleared, the shadows lifted, and then a final guttural scream erupted from Eleanor, her form disintegrating into the darkness, her voice echoing one last time. "Till death do us part." With a final, deafening silence, the curse of the black-hearted bride was broken. But as Ben and Natalie stood in the empty town square, the once haunting presence of Eleanor vanished. There was no sense of triumph in their hearts. The damage had been done. Ravenhead was no longer just a town. It had become a place where death lingered, where the past could never be fully buried, where love had turned into something dark, something eternal. And somewhere, hidden in the darkness, a new rose had begun to bloom. The silence that followed Eleanor's disintegration was suffocating. For a brief moment, Ben and Natalie stood there, heartbeats thudding in their chests, breathless but relieved. The ring, now in Ben's trembling hand, pulsed softly with a dim, eerie light. But as the glow of the ring slowly faded, so did the sense of victory. It wasn't over, not by a long shot. Ben looked down at the ring and felt a sharp pang in his chest. Something wasn't right. The shadows had lifted, yes, but there was an unsettling stillness to the town. No breeze, no sound, just that heavy silence that clung to the air. Natalie, still in shock, turned toward the distant inn. "We should get out of here, this place. It's not safe anymore." Ben nodded, but as they started to walk away, something caught his eye. At the base of the oak tree, beneath the cracked earth, where Eleonora had risen, another rose had appeared. This one wasn't just dark. It was pitch black, its petals nearly falling off, with blood-red thorns curling outwards like claws. As Ben approached the rose, a strange pull, like a magnetic force, urged him closer. He couldn't resist. Before Natalie could stop him, he reached down and touched it. The moment his fingers made contact, the ground beneath them trembled violently, the air crackled with electricity, and the world around them blurred, as if reality itself was being twisted. "Ben, stop!" Natalie screamed, but her voice was lost in the chaos. The sky above them seemed to fracture into 1,000 pieces like shattered glass. A violent wind whipped around them, carrying with it the sound of whispers. Faint at first, but then growing louder. The whispers became words. "Till death do us part. Till eternity." Ben's heart raced. What the hell is happening? The ground split open beneath them. Ben and Natalie both fell, tumbling into an abyss of darkness. Their screams were swallowed by the void, and then everything stopped. They were no longer in Ravenshead. They stood in an endless, distorted landscape. Dark skies above them, swirling with red and purple clouds. The ground was a cracked, barren wasteland, and in front of them stood the most terrifying sight of all. Eleanor Blackwood. The picture currently being sent out all over the country. Spitben stood staring, and suddenly he tried to scream again, but she was not alone. Around her were dozens of figures, all wearing the same tattered wedding dresses, their faces obscured by veils. The figures were eerily still, and yet there was a palpable sense of hunger in the air. "Ben, what is this?" Natalie whispered, clutching his arm. Ben couldn't answer. His mind raced, trying to process the nightmare before him. The ring in his hand was growing warm again, pulsing with an ominous light. Eleanor stepped forward, her eyeless gaze fixing on him, her grin wider than ever. "You think you've ended the curse?" Her voice echoed, twisting through the air like 1,000 serpents. "You've only begun it." Ben's chest tightened. "What do you mean? We broke the ring." Eleanor laughed, a hollow echoing sound. "The ring was never the source. The curse was never just about me. It was about the love that binds us, the betrayal that made us all suffer. The moment you touched that rose, you became part of it. You became part of us." Natalie gasped. "No, that's impossible." The world around them seemed to bend. The ground shifted, revealing dark, winding corridors of empty hallways, all decorated in faded, decaying wedding dresses. It was a twisted maze, a never-ending wedding procession. They were caught in a cycle, a wedding that could never be completed. "Till death do us part, and then beyond," Eleanor's voice whispered. Love cannot be escaped, it can never die, and neither can we. Suddenly, the veil-wearing figures moved. They circled around Ben and Natalie, their eyes hidden beneath the veils, but their presence suffocating. The roses in their hands, identical to the one Ben had touched, began to bleed, dripping black liquid onto the ground. It seemed to swirl, moving toward them like a living thing, as if it was alive, feeding on their fear. Ben could feel it now. The curse was alive, but worse. It had changed. His hand tightened around the ring, and then, in a split-second flash of madness, he realized something. This wasn't just Eleanor's curse. It's ours now, Ben said, his voice hoarse. What? Natalie asked, her eyes wide with horror. Ben's face twisted with realization. When we broke the cycle with the ring, we became part of it. We're the next generation. We are the ones who will carry the curse forward. We're the new bride and groom. The ground beneath them rumbled violently, and suddenly the truth hit them both like a ton of bricks. The curse wasn't just about vengeance. It was a never-ending loop. Every time someone tried to break it, they became the next part of the cycle, trapped forever in a twisted wedding of love and death. The whispers grew louder, the voices echoing through the air, merging with the cries of those who had come before them. Ben and Natalie stood frozen, unable to move. The roses began to bloom, faster now, everywhere, hundreds of them, all around them, forming a blood-red sea. The once quiet town of Ravenshade was now a nightmare, and no matter how much they struggled, they knew there was no escaping. The wind howled, and Eleanor's voice drifted into their ears once more. Till death do us part, and you shall never be free. Suddenly, a new voice emerged from the darkness, a voice that wasn't Eleanor's. It was deeper, colder. You are the new bride. You are the new groom. You will join the procession. Forever. And then, everything twisted. Ben and Natalie found themselves standing at the altar, their bodies forced into wedding attire, their faces blank with dread. Around them, the other figures, other lost souls, moved in sync, their hands holding roses, their eyes empty, staring through them. A wedding bell tolled, and they realized too late they had become part of the cursed ceremony. The last thing they saw was the shattered ring, now a twisted symbol of love that could never be fulfilled, and the final truth that echoed in their minds. They were trapped. The cycle would never end, and Ravenshade, forever haunted by love's darkest secret, would live on.